My name is Elijah Carter. I was born on a cotton plantation in the heart of Georgia, where the sun rose with a fiery promise. It rarely kept for folk like us. The mornings didn't smell of due-east flowers, but of damp earth, sweat, and the sharp, metallic scent of fear. Before the first rays of light even touched the fields, the day would begin, not with a rooster's crow, but with the chilling crack of the overseer's whip, a sound that sliced through the thick morning air and settled deep in your bones. It was a constant reminder of where we were and what we were. In that ward, built from endless labor and a silence enforced by dread, my mother's voice was my only sanctuary. Her name was Sarah. At night, in the cramped, musty air of our cabin, she would sing. Her songs weren't loud or defiant. They were soft, humming melodies that spoke of ancient rivers and distant stars. They were lullabies, woven from sorrow and a stubborn, quiet hope. Her hands, calloused and worn from picking cotton from sunup to sundown, would gently stroke my hair. In those moments, I wasn't just another slave's child. I was her son, and her love was a shield against the cruelty of our world. But shields can be broken. I was barely 7 when they took her. There was no grand reason, no dramatic transgression. A debt was settled, a deal was made, and she was simply gone. One morning, the spot beside me was empty. The cabin felt hollow, and the silence she left behind was louder than any whip. That day, I learned the first and most brutal lesson of slavery. It doesn't just steal your labor, it steals your family first. It plucks the heart from your world and leaves you with nothing but memories and a hope so quiet you can barely hear it yourself. From that day on, survival became a craft I had to master. The world was a text I learned to read with a desperate intensity. I watched everything. I memorized the heavy, deliberate gait of the overseer, Mr. Devies. I learned to distinguish the sounds of his different moods, the angry stomp, the impatient tap of his riding crop against his boot. I studied the patrol dogs, learning their paths, the timing of their feedings, the specific growl that meant they sensed something amiss. The night was no longer just a time for sleep. It became a landscape of shadows and sounds. I learned which trees offered the deepest darkness, which floorboards in the main house creaked, and how the wind could carry a whisper or muffle a footstep. I was a boy, but I was learning the skills of a ghost. Years passed, like the turning of slow, heavy seasons. The work never ended. The cotton plants seemed to bleed into my vision, their white tufts, a stark contrast to the dark soil and the even darker reality of our lives. But amidst the drudgery, a new feeling began to stir within me, and a few others. It wasn't a loud rebellion, but a shared glance, a subtle nod, a moment of silent understanding between me, a quiet man named Samuel, and a fiery young woman named Hattie. We were bound by the same chains, but we were also beginning to be bound by a shared dream. One sweltering afternoon, while cleaning out a dusty, forgotten shed near the master's house, my fingers brushed against something wedged between the floorboards. It was a piece of paper, torn and brittle with age. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a scrap of a map. It wasn't much, just a few crudely drawn lines, a river, and a symbol that looked like a star pointing north. North. The word itself was a prayer, a legend whispered in the darkest corners of the plantation. Freedom. For the first time, the abstract hope my mother had sung about had a shape, a direction. I showed the map to Samuel and Hattie that night, our heads huddled together under the faint light of a stolen candle. The risk was immense. To be caught planning an escape was a death sentence, and a slow one at that. But seeing that map, that fragile promise of another life, was like pouring water on a dying ember. A tiny flame of courage flickered to life within us. We knew the journey would be perilous, a desperate gamble against impossible odds, but the alternative a lifetime of servitude, of watching our own children be born into the same hopeless existence was a fate more terrifying than any danger the wilderness could hold. We planned for weeks, gathering scraps of food, studying the patterns of the moon and the guards. The day finally came on a bitterly cold night in late autumn. The wind howled, a perfect cover for our escape. With our hearts pounding a frantic rhythm, we slipped out of our cabins and into the consuming darkness. We ran. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs screamed in protest. We ran as if the hounds of hell were snapping at our heels, because in a way, they were. The journey was a brutal teacher. We waded through ice-cold rivers that stole a feeling from our feet and gnawed at our bones. The frozen water felt like 1,000 tiny knives. But we pushed on, driven by the phantom crack of the whip in our memories. We navigated dense, dark forests where every rustle of leaves could be a patrol, every shadow a threat. Hunger became a constant companion, a hollow ache in our stomachs that gnawed away at our strength. We ate what we could find: roots, berries, anything to keep moving. There were moments of despair so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on us. One night, huddled together for warmth, exhausted and starving, Hattie began to sob silently. The sheer hopelessness of our situation had finally broken through her fiery spirit. But Samuel, ever the steady one, put a hand on her shoulder. He pointed up through the canopy of barren trees to a single, bright star. "That's the one," he whispered. "That's the North Star. As long as we can see it, we have a path." His words, simple and true, reignited our resolve. It was our compass, our guide, our tangible link to the dream of freedom. But the path to freedom is paved with loss. We were not the only ones who ran that night. A few others had joined our desperate exodus. But the journey was unforgiving. A young man named Isaac, barely a man at all, succumbed to a fever after a week in the freezing damp. We buried him under a great oak tree, marking the spot with a pile of stones. A silent monument to a life that had yearned for freedom but found only a final, cold rest. His loss was a wound in our small group, a stark reminder of how fragile our own lives were. Even in our darkest moments, the thought of freedom was a persistent whisper in our hearts. We would talk about it in hushed tones as we rested. What would it feel like to wake up in the morning and own your own day? To walk down a road without looking over your shoulder? To know that your children would be born free? These weren't just fantasies. They were the fuel that kept us going. Every night, as I closed my eyes, I would imagine that road to the north, picturing the stars guiding us, feeling the wind at our backs carrying not the scent of fear, but the promise of hope. We made it far farther than I ever thought possible. We crossed into a new state, where the air felt different, lighter. But our luck ran out. Near a small town, we were spotted by slave catchers. The chase was short and brutal. Samuel fought with a ferocity I had never seen, buying Hattie and me precious seconds to flee in different directions. I never saw him again. I ran until I collapsed, hiding in a thicket as the sounds of pursuit faded away. I was alone. I was captured a day later, weak from hunger and grief. The journey back was a blur of chains and despair, but they couldn't take everything from me. They couldn't take the memory of the North Star, or the feel of running through the forest with hope in my heart. They couldn't erase the faces of Hattie and Samuel, or the courage we found together. And so I dreamed that somewhere out there, Hattie made Italiano. I dreamed that someday, someone braver, faster, and freer than I was will pick up the trail we blazed. Someone who will find the courage we almost grasped, and finally shout the word we could only whisper in secret: freedom. My body may be in chains, but my spirit remembers the run. It remembers the stars, and it holds on to the hope that the story doesn't end with me. If this story moves you, like this video and share it. Subscribe to Whispering History Tales so that more forgotten voices like mine can finally be heard. History isn't just about dates and facts. You learn in a book it's about the lives, the struggles, and the dreams we must never forget. It's for remembering. Thank you for listening.